Hey guys, and welcome back. If you've been following my series so far, we've missed out one critical step, which is arguably the most important and certainly the most contentious. And that's our homepage. We need to get that sorted right now. So I propose a battle royale of the top 3 homepages. I'm going to put them head to head. We're going to go through each one, looking at the features, ease of use, flexibility, and I'll give you my winner. And for the winner, I'll show you how to deploy that and how to configure it. So what is a homepage? Well, as important as it is to have something that you can brag to your friends with to validate why you're actually doing this, it can be a really handy tool. Now, I've shown you mine in the past, and if you haven't seen that, I'm not going to spoil it for you. You can find out at the end of this video. But I use my homepage as a homepage, not only as a handy way to bookmark all of the services and websites that I'm running, but moreover to show some of the statistics for each of those services in a convenient single pane of glass. Now, all of the homepages I'm going to show you today are a bit of a Swiss Army knife. They're not just static websites that show you your services. They also show things like, is the service up and running? What metrics it's got by plugging into the APIs, etc. And this can be really handy because it means that you don't have to log in to all of those systems and services. Later down the line, I'm going to show you how you can actually plug in notifications through things like Gotify, so you won't actually need to be on your homepage. But the homepage is a great way, certainly for me, that I can get a quick snapshot of everything that's going on in my lab. Now, some people like that. Some people might find it a bit overbearing, but the good news is all of these are configurable, so you can tailor them to your specific needs. If you want all of the metrics and all of the dashboards, hopefully we can get you there. If you want something that's simplistic and flexible, minimalist approach, you can also do that. So what are we going to be discussing today? Well, the big 3 as I see them, and thanks to everybody who voted, are, and it says it on the tin, homepage, Dashy, and Heimdall. And an honourable mention for Homer, which is also another popular one. So let's jump right into it, and we're going to start off with Dashy. So heading over to the Dashy site, we can begin to see why it's such a popular homepage. There are a ton of features to this dashboard, as well as a great UI. It does look pretty cool, I must admit. So things like favicons, font awesome, and custom images are all supported. So in terms of making this look and feel unique and tailored to exactly what you want, you can do all of that. It supports tons of out-of-the-box features and icons. Another big feature of Dashy are the widgets, and the number it supports is massive and ever growing, and you could even build your own if you wanted to. But some of the most useful ones that I saw when I was reviewing this are just the basics, really. A nice fancy clock. There's also a really handy weather widget, which you can customize and plug in with things like open weather maps to get a really detailed report of current weather, future weather, next 10 days, etc. One other widget that I thought was really useful is the RSS feed. Now, this is great for getting all of the latest headlines, news stories, etc. from all of your favorite websites. And being able to have that in a customizable fashion on your homepage is a really great thing. Having your public IP address readily available, again, can't be underestimated. The number of times I've had to type in what's my IP into Google because I simply forget. This is a great way for it to do it for you. Another handy tool is the domain monitor. And if you've been following my videos where we've set up a traffic reverse proxy with SSL certificates provided by Let's Encrypt, this will be useful to keep an eye on when they're going to expire. Yes, I know they're configured for auto renewal, but still, it's good to know that if something's going to go wrong, when it's going to go wrong. And you might also want to monitor some other certificates, either not managed through traffic or maybe not even owned by you. For all you crypto fans out there, Dashy's got you covered out of the box. Not only is there a watch list for your favorite tokens and crypto coins, but there's also a token history price as well, which will show you graphical data about past prices with each currency. And to round off that crypto suite, you can also track your wallet balance as well, which again is a pretty cool thing to have on your homepage. For those who use Mulvad as a VPN solution, there's a pretty cool integration here which will show you whether you're blocked, i.e. whether this is a known banned IP address, and it will show you your connection status and your IP. As someone who works in security, I found the vulnerability feed pretty neat. It's a bit similar to the RSS feed above, but you can plug this in so that it will report on the latest CVE vulnerabilities, and you can even dial it in to a specific product ID, i.e. if you just wanted to know about, I don't know, Nginx or traffic or Docker vulnerabilities, you can configure it just to report those, just in case you weren't worried enough about exposing your services. If you want to know your exchange rates, that's right there as well. And if you're like me, and useless at remembering public holidays, you can stick those in right on your dashboard as well, so then you've got no excuses. Sports scores is obviously going to be a popular one, so you can plug in your favourite sports, your favourite team, and keep track of them nice and neat on your front home page, which is actually pretty cool. News headlines is obviously another important one that you might want to add, so plug in your favourite news site, plug in your favourite topics, and you can have that displayed on your homepage. The health check status is also pretty useful, more from a monitoring standpoint, and it's a bit like an Uptime Kuma Lite. So you can plug in all of the services that you're running within your Homelab, and it can do various things like plug into the Docker sock to make sure the container's running, or you can set this up to ping a website, for example, or even look for a specific keyword, and given it matches, it's going to come back and report that that's up and running, which can be really useful to make sure that all your services are operational or all of the services that you want to monitor are up and running. You can get some handy system usage metrics as well, things like CPU, wait time, load, all of those things, which again can be really useful to monitor your Homelab and make sure that your systems are behaving and operating as expected. As you can see, there's things like CPU history which you can drill down into, and you might want to keep an eye on that every now and again, just to make sure there aren't any long-term spikes that looks like anomalous behavior, might be indicative of compromise, etc. And that's a similar story with your memory as well. If you see significant changes without you having done anything, that might be something that you want to go and have a look at. Your all-important ad blocker stats, you want to get those loud and proud on your homepage, so this is quite a cool little integration. And you can actually drill down even further into things like the actual Pi-hole queries, and you can get the number of allows and denies in graph form as well, so you can have quite a lot of information. You can also monitor some of your services, internal and external services, using this tool here, which will ping them, and it will also report back and give you an indication of your network performance. There's some decent integrations and widgets with common appliances like the Synology suite. This will show you the download station statistics, and that might be useful for you to keep an eye on your storage space. There's a handy Nextcloud integration, which can help you keep an eye on users and storage use. And if you're hell-bent on not using Grafana, Dashy could actually replace that for drilling down into some of the low-level metrics on your nodes. So for example here, this is using the Glances backend to pull out all of your system information. So things like your top services, your free RAM, your cache, your CPU usage, all of that stuff is available in Dashy. So in summary for widgets, I'm going to give it an A. That was a pretty comprehensive list. It's not only attractive and looks good, which is obviously the most important thing, but it's really informative. You've got high configurability in what you want to monitor. Not only can you take a single widget, you can also break some of those widgets down into their component parts. So for example, if you just want the CPU, you can just have the CPU usage. So as I touched on, the eye candy is really important, and some of the default themes within Dashy are really cool. I like pretty much all of them. I don't think I'd have them all. Some of them are a bit garish for me, but it's good that you've got those options. So I'm not going to delve too much into this, but it's great to see that you've got the customizability. And I know from deploying this in my Homelab, you can actually drill down into pretty much all aspects, and it's fully customizable with any color scheme that you can come up with. So what's really good about Dashy, and some of the others lack, is proper authentication. So most of them don't come with any authentication. And as I've just shown you, there's some quite sensitive data that you can display on your homepage that you wouldn't want other people to have access to. So it's really good, and a big thumbs up that Dashy allows proper authentication. It means that you don't have to fall back and rely on Authelia like I showed you in my last video. this actually has native authentication built into it. Now we're into the realms of the brownie points, and cloud backup definitely ticks that box. So with this, you don't have to rely on remembering to back up, like I showed you with the Restic and rclone backup videos. You can actually directly upload your config to the cloud at the click of a button. That's really cool. I don't think I would use it. I would prefer my method. But that's really handy if you don't want to go and set all that up. So well done, Dashy. Another awesome brownie point for Dashy are the alternate viewing and opening methods. Now, that might sound quite simplistic, but it's actually pretty powerful and something I didn't realize you could do in a homepage. Well, I did, but I didn't realize there was one that offered it. Now, I want to go away and review this because this could seriously sway my number one position. So what are we talking about here? Well, if I just scroll down on the homepage for a minute, no pun intended, you can see that you can actually build in all of your links into a sidebar and simply hover over them and view them through the same web page. So you don't need to open a new tab and navigate away. Dashy can actually display all of those for you. And for all you minimalists out there, Dashy's got you covered again. You can have a super minimal display that is reactive and expansive. So you want to blow something up and look inside, you can click on that, it will expand and you can see all of the stats. Don't want that clutter, you can simply minimize it and get rid of it. And probably the pièce de résistance is the opening method. Now, this is quite self-explanatory. It's how you want a link to open. Now, you can specify whether you want the page you're on to navigate you away from it and to the service you want. I often find that's a bit annoying, so I always open in a new tab. But there's a really cool feature here called a modal. Now, anyone who's done any web development kind of knows what a modal is. But it's basically a pop-up. So it's going to pop up when you click something, and it's going to render that service, that web page, within a pop-up window, a modal. Which is quite handy. It means that you don't have to navigate away from the page, you don't have hundreds of browser tabs open, you can do everything from inside one web page. So let's see Dashy in action. So here I've just gone to the demo website, and there's a pretty minimalist setup here, but I quite like it. It's colourful, it's highly configurable, and I could imagine over time I would just categorize these how I liked, and the fact that the icons on the areas are so small means that a lot of those widgets I spent time going through, I would have plenty of room to put those and accommodate them on my homepage. So how do I rate Dashy? Well, I've been really pleasantly surprised. I think Dashy is excellent. It's kind of my A tier. I'm in a terrible position where I think I might actually have to change from what I'm currently using to Dashy. I'm going to mull that over, going to sleep on it for a bit. Homepages are a slippery slope, and if you're not careful, you're going to end up spending more time configuring and tweaking them than actually learning stuff in your Homelab. But anyway, I give it an A. Let's move on to Heimdall. Now, for all you comic book fans out there, I think Heimdall is actually named after the character in the Marvel films. I think the guy who guards Asgard. But Heimdall takes a different approach to the homepage, and that is through simplicity. Now, I'm saying simplicity not being simple. This seems to be a conscious design choice. And as I said at the start, some people will prefer this as opposed to the bright lights and the overload of widgets. So let's have a quick look through what Heimdall has to offer, and then we'll look at some example setups so we can get a feel for what it can do. Now, as a disclaimer, I used to use Heimdall a long time ago, and I thought it was good, but it doesn't quite have the level of flexibility of Dashy, and it doesn't have the flexibility of my current setup. I might as well tell you now, I'm using Homepage. I'm sure you could work that out from the powers of deduction. And it really boiled down to that single pane of glass. I wanted something simple and sleek and highly customizable, and Homepage kind of gave me that, albeit I'm now thinking a bit about Dashy. But anyway, I digress. Let's get back onto Heimdall. So if we focus here on the top right, you can see that Heimdall has basically two categories for applications. It has what it calls foundation apps, and it has enhanced apps. Now, if we talk about that in the context of what we've just seen in Dashy, the foundation apps are pretty much just, it will have the logo and it will allow you to link to it. The enhanced apps are those where there might be an API and it can start to pull some metrics from that website. So this isn't necessarily a reflection of Heimdall, it's a reflection of all the different applications that are out there that have an API and have been programmed by Heimdall to be able to read. So as you can see from the bottom, there are app requests, so I expect this will grow over time. So let's have a quick look through and see if there's any must-haves. So if we look on the Foundation Apps page, we start to get a feel for how Heimdall works. Now, this lists 304 applications that work with Heimdall. Now, I said these aren't enhanced, so what do I mean by that? Well, if you click on one of these, say More Actions, you can download the app. Now, that's not going to download, in this case, Aki. I don't actually know what that is. Now, what it's going to do is download the pre-configured config files so that you can basically drag and drop those into your Heimdall installation, and it's going to show that icon on the page for you. You don't need to go through a complicated config file with various indentation rules, etc. You can actually just drag and drop these into a folder and it will pick them up when you do a page refresh because it's PHP. Now that's quite a nice approach to it, very user friendly, so I'm going to give it high marks for user friendliness. Certainly more user friendly than Dashy, albeit Dashy's really good as well and has 3 interactive ways that you can configure it. But let's leave that aside and let's jump into the enhanced apps. Now the enhanced apps take a similar approach, which I quite like. The website is really simple, easy to use, so if you download one of these apps, for example, there are going to be elements inside it that you can customize, and it's going to display that then on the homepage. So let's have a quick look at the AdGuard download and let's figure out what we can get from it. So I've just downloaded that, and inside we've got a number of files. We've got things like the AdGuard Home PHP, which is actually going to house all of the functions and code necessary to query the AdGuard API. So you can see things down here like the username and password, and that's what's going to be used to make authenticated API calls and pull some of those stats down. So things like your number of blocked queries, etc. And without going into too much detail, you can also see things like the config blade and the live stats blade, which are the active components which are going to pull those metrics into our home dashboard. And that's pretty much it in terms of how you set up and configure Heimdall. As I said, really simplistic, but that's a conscious design choice, and I quite like that. But if you're looking for something that's highly configurable, then Heimdall is probably not the one for you. So let's go and have a look at Heimdall in action. So here's an example with Heimdall, and as you can see, really straightforward. It's set up in a grid formation. There's a uniformity between all of the nodes and boxes, and the number of stats that you're going to get is quite limited. So typically you would have a couple of stats per application. So for me, this isn't quite my cup of tea, but some people prefer that minimalist aesthetic. So I'm going to give it a B. It's not quite for me, but it's definitely one to consider. So let's move on to Homepage, an app that does exactly what it says on the tin. So I gave it away earlier. Homepage is what I'm running, and you'll have known that if you've seen some of my videos already. And just going to the homepage, I don't know how many times I'm going to say that this video, but one of the key reasons I chose it is also listed there. So not only can you deploy this easily with Docker, which all the others so far also have Docker images for, but Kubernetes was one of the key things for me. So there is a Helm chart for homepage, which is easy to deploy. Not that you need a Helm chart, you can deploy manually with manifest, for example, but the fact is this plugs in nicely with Kubernetes and it pulls down all of the metrics. So I don't need to log into Proxmox to see all of my nodes. I can get all of the server stats for my Proxmox nodes on my homepage. It will show me my CPU, my RAM, my disk space, etc. And also here you can see that if you're running Unraid, you can deploy this on Unraid. So similar to Dashy, Homepage has the notion of static buttons that you can click just to redirect you to a new page, but it also has service widgets, and these are very similar, just a different aesthetic. So one of the key differences between Homepage and probably Dashy, which is its closest rival, I'm going to rule Heimdall out of comparisons with Homepage and Dashy, just because I think they're at the opposite end of the spectrum for what they're trying to achieve. Now, in terms of customizability, Homepage is pretty good. In terms of ease of use, I would probably say Dashy is going to beat it on this one because it has an inbuilt browser that you can tweak the config within the web GUI, which is really handy if you want to make custom changes on the fly and you don't want to have to remote in an SSH and open up your config file and save it, or open up your VS Code, submit it, redeploy your container, all of that stuff. So certainly from a user convenience standpoint, Dashy's going to beat it. But once you get behind the hood, and I argue that you probably want to be doing the command line config anyway, or certainly doing this in a text editor and then saving the config, just so you get all the indentation right, etc. And then you're back to the code. So there's not really much to it, as long as you get the indents right, and you can pretty much cut and paste all the examples that are provided on the website. And much like Dashy, Homepage enables you to group and expand and have drop downs, so you can expand certain sections and see all your apps, and then you can tidy them away afterwards. Much like Dashy, you can choose all of the font awesome icons, MDI icons, etc. So you've got complete control over which icon set you want to use, and ultimately sort of what theme color palette you want to use as well. There's some really handy things like Docker integration and ping services, which we saw in Dashy. So I'm not going to go through these prescriptively just because I've been using this for a long time and you're going to have to trust me. But there's a lot of feature parity in terms of what the services are on offer. And just like in Dashy, there's the notion of service widgets in the homepage case. Now, these are where it's going to plug into the application and pull out all of those APIs. So I'll show you in a minute what mine looks like, where I've configured that for a lot of the services I use. And on top of that, you get the information widgets, which, like Dashy's normal widgets, those are things which aren't necessarily about your home lab, but are able to pull things like external resources. So it can do things like open weather map, it can do even plugging into things like your Unify controller, date and time, all of that kind of stuff. So let's go ahead and have a quick look about what a homepage looks like. So for those of you who've been watching my videos, you'll have seen this before, probably in my first video actually. So this is my homepage, and I much prefer it to Heimdall because it gives me all of the information that I want to see. As I mentioned, it's got the Kubernetes cluster at the top detailing all of my Proxmox nodes, and then below that it has all of my Longhorn storage, which I use for my persistent Kubernetes storage. You can see that many of my services, so things like Pi-hole, it has the apps plugged into it. I can see when people are watching something on my Jellyfin, and it comes up with a handy pause button if you want to annoy them. Similarly, things like my Minecraft server, it plugs into that. It shows me how many notifications I've got in Gotify. It'll show me how many VMs I've got up and running. And it even plugs into things like my Uptime Kuma, because I like to have that as a separate application that does all of my monitoring for me. So what do you think, guys? Have I made the right decision? I'm starting to think a lot about Dashy actually, because I think that looks really cool. Now, do I want a Swiss Army knife for a homepage? I'm not sure. I quite like the approach that Homepage have taken. They focus on their specific level of detail they want to provide, and I think they do a really good job. So in terms of features, I'm probably going to have to bump this down to now an A- because I've seen what Dashy can do. Now, I still think that's probably more than I want it to do for a homepage, but if that's what you're wanting, an all-in-one, all-encompassing solution, then Dashy's probably the one to go for. But for this video, I'm going to hop into now how to deploy Homepage, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Just bear in mind that the other two that I've spoken about, again, they're Docker Compose files. They're pretty straightforward to get the bare bones up and running, and it won't be too difficult to go through the documentation and set up the config for you. So over onto my GitHub, I've got the config file ready for you to spin up Homepage, and it's pretty straightforward. And there are a couple of commented out options here, so let's have a quick look at those. The first one is the user. Now we're going to run this as a root container because we're going to attach it to the Docker sock, which you can see as a volume mount. The reason we're doing that is because we want Homepage to have access to the Docker sock so it knows which services are running. This is useful because it shows us whether the container is up and running, healthy or down, and I'll show you that in a minute when we get this up and running. The second option is the ports. Now, I've got this configured to take advantage of our reverse proxy that I've set up in previous videos, but if you don't want to use a reverse proxy, delete the labels section and uncomment the port, and you'll just need to connect to this via the Docker VM IP and its port, in this case 3000. If you do decide to use the proxy, I've commented a couple of options at the bottom. One of those is the traffic IP whitelist. Now, we haven't got onto that yet, but within traffic, you can specify which subnets, which IP addresses you want to have access to this. Again, because Homepage unfortunately doesn't have authentication like Dashy does, we have to put in some extra layers, and you might wish to put in an IP whitelist. Similarly, below that, we're taking advantage of Authelia. So you might want to put Authelia in front of your homepage and lock it down with a single factor or two-factor authentication. Other than that, this compose file is pretty straightforward, so let's jump into deployment. Thankfully for this container, there aren't any folders or files that we need to create. It will create those files and folders for us on deployment. And you can see that it's going to create them in /home, /ubuntu, /docker, /homepage. So I've copied the compose file you can see in the background into my Docker VM, and now I'm going to connect to my SSH terminal and deploy this container. So it's the same command that we've used throughout these videos. We're going to run that. Hopefully that should be up and running. Everything looks fine. I'm going to go and check that quickly in Portainer, and hopefully there'll be no error messages. So in Portainer, it's reporting as healthy. Let's just check the logs in case. Now you can see there's a couple of errors here. That's because it's the first time that Homepage is set up. So it's been trying to connect to things that don't exist. That's not a problem. We're going to go and fix that in a moment. At the bottom, you can see all the files that were created for Homepage to work. Now, these are the YAML files that we're going to need to edit and configure for our setup. The main thing we're going to do in this one is the services.yaml, and I'll jump into that in a moment. But before we do that, we just want to make sure that it's got access to our Docker sock, which we'll do in the docker.yaml file. So let's go and do that now. So that's as simple as navigating to the docker.yaml file, opening that up with nano, and then seeing what's inside. Now, as you can see here, the my docker.sock, the bottom piece, is commented out. So we need to uncomment that and restart Homepage. Now, if you chose not to run this as root, this wouldn't work because the sock needs to have a container that's running as root. If you don't want to do that for security reasons, you'd have to go with the first option in here, which is an IP and a port. But before that, you need to turn on the Docker API, and there's instructions of how to do that on the Homepage website. So I've simply deleted those comments, and now your config should look like this. Let's save that config and restart Homepage. And we can do that with a simple sudo docker restart Homepage. Now that's restarted, let's go and check if Homepage is up and running. And this will either be your URL that you specified in your traffic labels, remember to add it to Pi-hole or whatever DNS resolver you're using, or it's the IP of your Docker VM and port 3000. Excellent. This is the default setup for Homepage, and we're able to access it. And because it's got root privileges, it's already reading the CPU, the free RAM, and the disk space of my Docker VM. But this isn't very useful, is it? Let's go and customize it. I'm going to give you a couple of containers. I'm going to show you how to add traffic and Pi-hole, but please refer to the documentation on the Homepage website. There's a really handy little search in the top right corner, and you can just type in whichever application you want to use, provided it's supported. But what I'm going to show you with the services.yaml file, you just basically need to replicate. Not all of the files will be exactly the same. Some of them will have things like a username and password. Others will just have a widget or an API key. Just make sure, as I said, that you refer back to the documentation. So heading back into my terminal, I'm going to open up the services.yaml file and make some edits. So in here, you can see the code for the home page that's in the background. At the top, we've got my first group. You can see that in the top left in the background. We've got my first service, and then we've got some service that comes by default. So I'm just going to leave all that as is. You can change this, you can create new groups, new columns, etc., new groups, whatever you want to do. But to add a couple of services, I'll show you how to do that. So here you can see that I've added traffic and Pi-hole, and I've just simply followed the documentation on the homepage website. I've added a hyphen and then the name traffic, so that is the name that it's going to be given on the dashboard. So if I called this traffic 2, if you had 2 traffics running, it would be labelled traffic 2 on the dashboard. It requires an icon, and again, you can find those on the homepage website. It has an href, so this is the link within your environment, or it could be an external link to an external site. Description, fine. A server, now this is the bit where we went into the Docker services. So I specified that it's my Docker, which is the name of the service that Docker's running as. You can change this name to whatever you want, just make sure it's consistent. Now, what will happen is it will be looking for a container called traffic, which is the line below, container. And if it finds that by connecting to the SOC, it will give us the healthy status or whatever status the container's in. And I'll show you that in a minute when we deploy this. The next bit is the interesting bit, which is the widgets, which are akin to what Dashy does with its widgets. This is going to query the traffic API using the credentials within the widget. Just be mindful of those indents, and it should be able to pull metrics into our dashboard. It's a similar process for Pi-hole. Copy the default config, and again, if you want those stats, you need to set up the widget. In this case, you're going to have to log into Pi-hole and create an API key. That's really straightforward. You can find the documentation on the website, but you can do it all through the GUI, which is really helpful. And then simply paste in the IP address and the API key. And if you've done that right, it should display all of those metrics on your dashboard. So I'm going to go ahead now and save this, and then I'm going to restart homepage. So now let's restart homepage, and hopefully, touch wood, the web page in the background should automatically refresh, and we should have the statistics for both traffic and Pi-hole. And here we go. Excellent. You can see that traffic and Pi-hole are there. Both of them in the top right hand corner have the running. Now that's because it's querying the services running on our Docker daemon. And I have one called traffic as specified, and I have one called Pi-hole as specified. So both of those are running, and because Pi-hole's got health stats built into it, it's saying that it's healthy. Now if one of the containers was down or it was unreachable, it would come up as unhealthy. And you can see that for both of those applications, I'm getting the respective metrics. So for traffic, it's telling me how many routers I've got, how many services, and how many middlewares. And similarly for Pi-hole, it has the queries, the number blocked, the blocked percentage, and how many are in my gravity list. That's the ban list. So awesome, everything's up and running, and you can go and add more services to this by following the documentation. So thanks for watching, guys, and please don't hate me if I didn't choose your favourite homepage. This was just a bit of fun, but hopefully you've got 3 great options now, and you can choose the one that best suits your needs. I really love homepage, but I'm now seriously considering Dashy. But anyway, I'll leave the configs in my GitHub, which should give you a little jump start. But in any case, please refer to the documentation and have fun setting up your homepage. It's an awesome tool. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe and leave a comment below, and I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.